Chiefs Kingdom, I am dancing with the girl who brought me. I am going back to my roots. Blame it all on my roots. I showed up with stats. So if you remember, really early on in my career, involved with writing about the Chiefs, blogging about the Chiefs, I would focus pretty heavily on statistics. And I haven't had a lot of time to really generate some data, gather some data over the past, however many months, years, because I've been developing an application that helps people with addiction support and addiction recovery. But I had a little time to carve out a couple graphs today, and I wanted to share with you my findings on Patrick Mahomes' career. And there's really two hypotheses that I want to test and I want to evaluate regarding the greatest quarterbacks who have ever played, which I believe Mahomes already is in that discussion. The first hypothesis is it common for a quarterback to have a resurgence in their career? And then the second hypothesis I want to test is, has Mahomes' production really fallen off a cliff like it feels like it has? Or are we just hallucinating this and really it's not that big of an issue? So the first thing is pretty straightforward. Or the second hypothesis is pretty straightforward. We can look at Mahomes' production and we can ask ourselves, does this look like he's fallen off a cliff? So you can see by our graph here, in year 6 of Mahomes' career, he threw for over 5,000 yards. He's only thrown for over 5,000 yards twice in his career. Once in his second year in the season, second year of his career, and then in the 6th year of his career. He's done it twice. But the past 2 years, he's been hovering around 4,000 yards. Year 6 of his career, 2022, the greatest season by a starting quarterback in NFL history that no one talks about, was the year that Mahomes had the number one offense in the NFL. Eric Bieniemy was his offensive coordinator. And he was throwing to guys like Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Then comes Matt Nagy, year 7, year 8, and Mahomes looks mortal. Think of that as you will, but I kind of want Nagy to have a short leash this season. And if Mahomes is to make a resurgence, it's going to be on the backs of his receiver group, which has much improved. So if I am a betting man, or if I were a betting man, I would put money on Mahomes having a resurgent year. But is it common for quarterbacks to have a resurgence in year 8? Or do you kind of get what you get with them? So let's look at Mahomes and how he stacks up in terms of passing yards versus Brady. As we already know, the first 8 years of Mahomes' career have overshadowed Brady's production. It's inarguable. Mahomes has played better than Brady in the first 8 years of his career. What really set Brady apart was the tail end of his career, after year 10, after the season where he was hurt by Bernard Pollard and had his season ended during week 1. And Matt Castle came in as a backup for the Patriots in that game, led them to victory, led the Patriots to a 10-6 record that year. And the Chiefs, maybe it was a mistake, maybe it wasn't a mistake, but they signed Matt Castle long term. Eventually that rocky road led them to Alex Smith, Andy Reid, and Patrick Mahomes. But after year 9 for Tom Brady, he really had a resurgence. It is the second half of Brady's career that solidified him as the greatest quarterback of all time. So Tom Brady, if we're looking for a resurgence, he didn't do it in year 8. It was around year 12, the 12th year of Tom Brady's career, where he kind of had that resurgence. Now let's look at Dan Marino. And while I'm talking about Dan Marino, let's talk about the list of quarterbacks I picked. So I wanted to pick 6 of the best quarterbacks of all time, in my opinion. Those quarterbacks happen to be Tom Brady, Dan Marino, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Joe Montana, and Patrick Mahomes. If you disagree with that list, which I'm sure some of you will, let me know down in the comments who you think I snubbed out of this list. And then also, since you do such a good job keeping me honest in the comments, hit that like button if you've not done so already, and then subscribe if you'd like to join some of the best content the best Chiefs content on YouTube here at RGR Football. So looking at Marino's career, once again, Patrick Mahomes has overshadowed Marino. But to think about Marino, what he was doing in 1983, 1984 is just insane. It was unheard of to throw for 5,000 yards in 1984, and Dan Marino was doing it. But did Dan Marino have a resurgence in his career? I'm going to say no, he did not. I mean, he was injured in year 11 and came back in year 12 and had a bit of a resurgence, but it was all downhill from there. So maybe if in year 11 Marino hadn't gotten hurt, we would see a resurgence in year 9, 10, 11, and 12. But no, Dan Marino really didn't have a resurgence, but it could have been because of that injury stopping him from being very productive in year 11. Moving on to Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning, one of his most underrated abilities was that he was extremely consistent. Every year he was going to give you about 4,000 to 4,500 yards. He didn't have a resurgence until after his injured season in year 14 where he hurt his neck, didn't play at all that year, came back in year 15 and was lights out. And then after year 17, fell off a cliff in year 18. So both Manning and Brady had resurgences very late in their careers. And once again, Patrick Mahomes is outperforming Manning to start his career. Moving on to Drew Brees. Drew Brees did not have a resurgence. However, Mahomes severely outperformed Brees early on in his career. But by year 8, Brees had overshadowed Mahomes. Brees' career was a slow burn upwards. It wasn't as though he had, an awesome start to his career in San Diego. It was this continued progression of improvement and then a continued level of excellence from year 11 to year 16. And this is the trend that I am finding to be very interesting. For Tom Brady, Dan Marino, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, they had their prime years from around year 11 to year 15, year 16. Mahomes is in year 8. So the question I beg to all of you, will Mahomes' prime be earlier or later in his career? Will it be like these other great quarterbacks who enjoyed prime seasons later in their career, or is Mahomes too reliant on his legs and athleticism? That's a question I'm not sure of because Mahomes is an unbelievable pocket passer. He's unbelievable outside the pocket too. I think that there's no reason Mahomes shouldn't be able to have his prime years ahead of him as compared to behind him. So this should scare the rest of the NFL that Mahomes maybe, given the information from the other quarterbacks in the history of the NFL who are also all-time greats, Mahomes might not have even hit his best years yet. That, to me, is crazy. Looking at Joe Montana, definitely didn't start off as strong as Mahomes. Was injured in year 13 and 14, had those elbow problems, and then had a resurgence late in his career, year 16, 17, 18, where he played some of his best football. So you see these quarterbacks, different eras, having resurgences late in their career. So regarding my hypothesis, if I were to ask, do I think it's likely that Mahomes plays better year 8, I would say yes. But I would also say that given the data of the other quarterbacks, when is it most likely that he will have his resurgence? And I will say it will be in a couple years. Now, I hope that's wrong. I hope Mahomes plays lights out. But Mahomes might be playing his best football in his mid to late 30s, and we haven't seen it yet. Looking at touchdowns for all the quarterbacks, we'll paint that picture as well. So Mahomes touchdowns, first year starting, 50 touchdowns, has not touched that. The second highest was 41 in year 6. Compared to Brady, Brady's a little bit all over the place. You can see that over the years he was up and down, and then later in his career, after year 10, you start to see those larger numbers than he had through his first 6, 7, 8 years of his career. Moving on to Dan Marino. Dan Marino started off with a ton of touchdowns and then tapered off and kind of fizzled out a little bit later in his career. Looking at Peyton Manning, Peyton Manning had that huge resurgence year 15. Before that, he was pretty stable regarding passing touchdowns. Looking at Drew Brees, that slow burn, again, that we talked about, didn't necessarily have a huge resurgence, but he started playing his best football after year 10, year 11, year 12, year 13, year 14. Looking at Joe Montana, started off pretty solid his first several years and then went downhill. Year 13, year 14 had his injuries, and then 15, 16, 17 picked back up and started playing much better at the tail end of his career. So the hypothesis that I have and I wanted to test is it common for all-time great quarterbacks to have a resurgence in their career? And I want to say yes. Every single one of them had a resurgence at some point in their career. Most of them, it was later. But most of the quarterbacks, if not all of them, had their prime season starting at year 10, 11, 12, 13. Mahomes is heading into his 9th season in the NFL. And if these quarterbacks, their prime is usually year 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, that means before their prime, they maybe hit a bit of a dip in their production, and then that is where Mahomes is at right now. The Chiefs offensively are doing everything they can to support Mahomes, and this is why I believe, based on the Jimmies and the Joes the Chiefs have in the receiver room, they are going to see Mahomes have one of the better years of his career. If Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, all the rest of the Chiefs wide receiver group can stay healthy in 2025, and this group does not meet the potential that they have, and Mahomes does not put out a solid year, then I believe there is no excuse for the Chiefs not to move on from Matt Nagy. This is a put up or shut up year for the Chiefs as long as they can stay healthy. Given the history of these all-time great quarterbacks, Mahomes is in a position to have a better year and see a resurgence perhaps earlier than the other quarterbacks have. So let me know down in the comments whether or not you think Mahomes even needs to have a resurgent year, or if he's already playing great, it's just another couple things need to work out for him. Let me know down in the comments. But this is Gary signing out. I hope you all enjoyed this content. I enjoyed sharing it with you. You all take it easy. Have a good rest of your weekend. And enjoy Saturday's preseason football game. I know I will. Y'all take care.